When we're talking about injustice in the world, there's a lot of different terms that get thrown around. One of those words is ableism. We use this a lot in the disability community to describe interactions with other people, interactions with space, interactions with systems. We talk about this concept of ableism, we'll call something ableist, but for people who are newly disabled or just getting into what is the language of disability, this word can feel really intimidating. If that someone sounds like you, then this video is definitely for you. If you're new to my channel, my name is Isa, and I'm a disabled writer and advocate. I am currently getting my PhD in communication studies with a focus in disability resilience and resistance. On this channel, I talk a lot about the different things that I've learned, and I hope that series like this can help equip people to have better conversations about disability. Let's start off with Merriam-Webster's definition. Merriam-Webster defines ableism as discrimination or prejudice against people with disabilities. So what does discrimination and prejudice mean? Discrimination are actions used against a group of people, and prejudice are beliefs against a certain group of people. So ableism is where actions and beliefs are against disabled people. I really like the way that the author of Academic Ableism talks about this, Jay Dolmage. He explains that ableism renders disability as abject, invisible, disposable, less than human, while able-bodiedness was represented as at once ideal, normal, and the mean or default. So basically is that disability is treated as something that is breaking the norm. Not only is it breaking the norm, like you're not drinking with your friends, it is that there are these standards of expected human behavior. And if you are not adhering to those standards because of your disability, it treats you as less than human. My favorite definition of ableism comes from Talila A. Lewis, who's an advocate who does a regularly updated definition of ableism as we see it today. So she defines ableism as a system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based off of societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in eugenics, anti-blackness, misogyny, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. And then she continues and explains that this system of oppression leads to people and society determining people's value based off of their culture, age, language, appearance, religion, birth or living place, health/wellness, and or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce, excel, and behave. The big thing she notes here is that you do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. We'll be talking more about what that means throughout this video. Before breaking down ableism into some subsets, I want to explain what does it mean that ableism is socially constructed. What is social construction, you ask? What we are saying when we say that ableism is socially constructed is that these are not ideas that we're born with. We're not innately terrified of disability. We're not innately seeing disability as abnormal. If you even look at like kids with glasses, we don't see a kid who needs glasses as subhuman. We just get them glasses. Now, with more complicated disabilities or other kind of cultural contexts of economics and things like that, it could get a lot more complicated for that example. But what I think is a really good example of how we socially construct away from ableism is there's a bit that the comedian Josh Sandquist does. It's so funny because he is an amputee, and he was talking about how he really struggles to explain stuff to children. He doesn't know how to explain the medical situation to them. And one time he heard a kid yell at and point at him and go, "Mom, that man's leg fell off." And the mom, without missing a beat, went, "Yeah, that just happens sometimes." And the kid moved on. So in that moment, reifying that disability doesn't have to mean abnormal. It doesn't have to be something crazy. It's just a natural, normal part of life. But for a lot of parents, they'll respond in a different way where it's like, don't point it out, don't do any of this, and kind of like create that tension in that moment, teaching the kid that disability is something to be scared of or to be scared to talk about even.
Oops, that happens sometimes.
Understanding that ableism is socially constructed is very important, because then it allows us to approach ableism as a concept that can be socially deconstructed, that we can take apart ableism and help create the world to be more accessible and inclusive of everyone. The first area that I want to talk about for ableism is ableism in systems. So this is the ableism that we see embedded into our society. The most straightforward example is a building that has no ramp, that has no elevators, that has no anything. The system itself, the architecture, is built in a way that excludes disabled people.
Where's the wheelchair ramp? A garbage ramp?
It's not just a garbage ramp.
No, it's a garbage in my son ramp.
This goes into our policies and the ways that we function. For example, there was a job that I was looking at applying for when I graduated with my master's that was just a teaching position, but it had a minimum weight requirement for how much you're supposed to be able to carry. Like, I'm gonna carry a 25-pound something to my speech class, I guess. And those types of policies that look for wellness are forms of discrimination and ableism. Other examples of ableism in our systems is in the United States, the laws about getting on disability and marrying, that there's a lot of disabled people who do not get married, especially to other disabled people, because if two disabled people get married, then they will lose potentially their benefits. There's ways to get around it, but it's very, very difficult. And that is the system, being ableist, trying to prevent marriage of disabled people or disabled people marrying in general if they're dependent on the state. The most egregious form of ableism in our systems is the way that ableism is used against other marginalized communities. One really important example from our US history for us to remember and understand is phrenology, which is the idea that you can measure someone's skull and based off of their skull, which is changes based off of your race, that you can determine someone's temperament, you can determine if they are able to make decisions for themselves, their intelligence, and everything like that. Because phrenology argued that white people had better shaped skulls that showed that they were obviously more intelligent, more capable, and that black people just needed white people to come and take care of them, and that they couldn't achieve anything more. And so using in that way ableism to reinforce racism. And that's what I really want you guys to remember as we have this conversation in today's video, is that ableism is frequently used to reinforce the discrimination against other marginalized groups. The same conversation happens when homosexuality is treated as an illness that is infectious to other people. It is something that needs to be cured. It is not a natural part of life. We go back to that whole idea of what is natural versus not natural, what is normal and not normal. And so much of it ties back into the concepts of disability and ableism. The next way that I want to talk about ableism is ableism in our media, largely in the form of jokes. People with disabilities are treated as the brunt of the joke, or characters will use disability slurs as part of the joke. They'll refer to things like vegetables to refer to anybody in a wheelchair. And this goes for both our social media and the media that we consume, like in movies and TV shows. Another way that we say ableism is when you have a disabled character who becomes disabled, and their entire character plot, and generally they're the villain, their entire character plot is trying to cure themselves or heal or do something like that. And they don't provide nuance, they don't provide context or explore the complexity of why they want to be cured. They just want to be better, and it's everyone's fault. See Captain Hook versus Victor from Arcane, which I could talk all about Arcane. So if you want a video about disability representation in Arcane, let me know, because I have some thoughts, and I really like the way that Victor is represented. And this is a spoiler alert here, but Victor does become an antagonist, but a lot of his motivation for trying to find this cure is so that he can continue his work, and the threat of illness is the threat of not being able to finish his work before he dies, versus someone whose entire plot is they just want to become normal, and so they're going to do these egregious things to become normal, which makes the assumptions that disabled people all A, want a cure, and B, would do anything to achieve that cure, because people just can't comprehend having a disability and kind of learning to live with it. There are other nuances and things that happen in media that are ableist. There's so many videos about that. I have a video about some of my least favorite tropes here. So the next area I want to talk about is interpersonal ableism, which occurs in interactions of two or more people. So one of the examples of this is when someone talks to the appearing non-disabled person over the disabled person. So going to my mom instead of me being like, what can she do? What does she want? What does she blah, blah, blah. Fill in the blank, instead of asking me, who she can answer questions for herself, and she can ask for things and advocate for herself. But they always defer to the non-disabled person, again, assuming that non-disabledness is the standard and easier to communicate with. Now, another example of this is the belief that disabled people can't do a specific job. Now, there are some jobs that certain limitations keep you from doing, but simply, like, for example, being a wheelchair user shouldn't be exclusionary of being able to teach. What makes it exclusionary are the systems. So a lot of times they'll be like, oh, I don't think you can do this because it's a lot more complicated. There's just this assumption that disabled people don't have ways of accommodating themselves, or that there can't be accommodations made to make things accessible for disabled people, and that the reason why they can't do it is their own incapability rather than the system that is put in place. And you see how these things interact. The system that's put in place that makes it difficult for disabled people to exist in working spaces. And then we also have the dismissal of disabled lives that happen regularly during the 2020 through 2022 era online, where people were actively telling their loved ones that they don't care if high-risk disabled people die, having these interactions and these conversations about justifying disabled death and justifying that the lack of care for those lives. And then we get to the final form of ableism that I want to talk about today, which is internalized ableism. If you are a disabled person, you are experiencing, I don't think there's a single person who does not suffer from some form of internalized ableism. Internalized ableism means that you feel ableism against yourself, that you have limiting beliefs. I've seen this a lot for parents of people with disabilities who are huge disability advocates, who are like, you are like, disability is a natural part of life, that illness happens at any time, that they'll advocate, they'll ask for access and accommodations for their kids. And then the moment that they experience any form of temporary disability, illness, ailment, injury, that they can't use a wheelchair because that means something else. Like, their kid can use a wheelchair, that doesn't mean anything. But if they use a wheelchair, that means that they're lazy, that means that they're not doing something, that means X, Y, and Z. So that is a form of internalized ableism. If you are disabled, internalized ableism can be limiting beliefs. It can be following into this idea of the things that the system tells you, the things that people tell you, the things that media tells you, and believing that against yourself, or that you have to achieve a certain level of problems to be able to use mobility aids, or to seek out medical attention, or to even identify as disabled. This is where we get into comparative suffering, where some disabled people will even, internalized ableism can be expressed against other people with disabilities, especially those who have different types of disabilities, where a lot of times there'll be conversations of like physical disability versus neurodivergency, and people are like, you don't understand where I'm coming from, you don't suffer as much as I do, you don't have the right to identify this way, or you don't have the right to do these things. And that's not the case always, but sometimes it does express itself that way. Or sometimes someone who has had to accommodate other people about their disability, had to like use the bare minimum of accommodations, or had to function when their body really couldn't and shouldn't, and they push themselves, that they may hold that belief that every disabled person, without meaning to, every disabled person should be able to push themselves like that. And so when you have someone else come along who refuses to do that, refuses to compromise their well-being for the sake of whatever institution they're trying to access, or conversation, relationship, then the first person may become frustrated with the second person because they're not working hard enough, or they're not representing what disability doesn't have to be this big major thing. For some people it is. So that's the comparative element of it, and comparing everything based off of your personal experience of disability can be very ableist, and assuming that even like you may align more with non-disabled people, but those are the real disabilities, or those are like the bigger throwaways. And I think that's where we get into a lot of conversations about people who have higher support needs that we really don't talk about or give space to in the disability world. The final area of internalized ableism that I want to talk about is feelings of being a burden, because there's a lot of messages in the world that says you're a burden, and then sometimes you just really, really feel like it. And I have been actively trying to work on this part of my internalized ableism, that I have to be able to do everything alone, that I have to be independent, that I have to do all of this, and that makes me a stronger, better person. And I, this past week, ended up in the ER because I had a flare-up of a thing, and it was really scary. And in that decision of like going to the ER, getting medical attention, or doing any of these things, I had to decide to ask for help. And the next day, I called my mom, and I was like, Mom, I need help. I can't get out of bed. I need my prescriptions. And I wasn't comfortable enough asking my roommate to do all of that. I love her. She's amazing, absolutely beautiful human being. But I understand my relationship with my mom better. And so for fear of being like, not even for fear, for being a burden. I didn't want to be a burden on my roommate, but I knew that my mom would care more about helping me than feeling like a burden. She'd also like hit me against the head if I was like, hey, being a burden to you. She's like, stop it. That's not what our family does. And that's what my sister even said. She's like, stop. You need help. We'll help you. And you need to just learn to be okay with that. And you need to learn how to accept help in your life, because sometimes you're going to need it and sometimes other people are going to need it. And that is what support swapping, and that's what it means to be in community with other people, is to be supported by them in your moments. What are some other things that you guys want to learn about disability? Some helpful things to get us all on the same page, or some more nuanced takes and conversations about access, education, disability in media. Give me an excuse to talk about media. Just give me an excuse, because technically that's not what this channel is about, but I love to read, I love books, I love movies, I love stories. So give me an excuse to talk about different disability in media. Just comment it down below. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like and subscribe. Have a wonderful week, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.